you go through there. Come on, you come past me. Good dogs. Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. At this time of year, one of the key things you can do to keep the garden looking good is just keep propping and supporting it. There is a tendency for things to flop a bit and sag. Just go around propping plants up, staking them, supporting them. Just keep that energy going for a few more weeks. Now, today we have a special program because we shall be devoting it to gardening and health. Both the good health that so many of us feel when we are out in our gardens in all weathers, surrounded by plants and a place that we love. It does us good. But we're also looking at gardening and ill health and the growing awareness that gardening can help alleviate the symptoms of both mental and physical pain. So for the next 60 minutes, we shall be looking at that close relationship between gardening and the quality of our lives. Coming up on today's programme, Arit visits the Blackthorn Trust Physic Garden in Kent, where therapy, gardening and socialising go hand in hand.
Coming to Blackthorn, each part and each stage of the programme brought me back to life.
And Adam has been to visit a garden in Oxfordshire created for and by people living with Parkinson's.
You get the chance to actually do things that you forgot you could do again. And surprisingly, when you come here, you suddenly find out that you think you've got a problem, but next minute you're on your knees putting plants in.
And I shall be here at Longmeadow, in the garden that I love, and doing the thing that makes me feel healthier and happier than anything else in the world. I normally use these bean sticks to support beans or clematis or any other climber. But today, this is acting as a measuring rod because I want to trim these RSUs. It's going to be done in 2 stages, and I'm using this stick to make sure that they are all the same height. And the problem with RSUs is they start out life, like all of us, slim and upright and not needing any support at all. But then, like most of us, middle age kicks in, gravity starts to have a stronger effect, and they sag in the middle. Now, you can tie them up, and these are all tied, and that helps a lot. But if you can trim them from early on, they do hold their shape much better. But the first thing I want to do is to take the tops off, and then I'll tackle the sides. Right, that's nice and strong. Here we go. So there's the line. For yew, whether it be RSU or normal yew, a hedge, topiary or tree, if you cut it anytime from the beginning of August through to the end of October, it will stay nice and crisp all through winter, right through till next May when it starts to grow again. Having established the height, that is not half of it, because the next stage is to trim the sides. And they are a lot more shaggy than they look because they're tied in at the moment with strong twine. As these branches have grown, the weight and gravity have combined to splay them out. And if I had cut these back regularly when they were young, they would be shorter and much denser, and they would have stayed upright. So that's the first lesson. If you have bought a fastigiate yew, clip it regularly, once a year, every year from the moment you get it. However, what I'm going to do is give it a light trim and then tie it all back up again. The reason why I grow so much yew and box and evergreens of all kinds in this garden is partly so the garden looks good in winter, but mainly because it makes me, the gardener, feel so much better in winter, because the shining green in the garden is a great source of comfort, and increasingly doctors and the whole medical profession are finding that gardening can be very powerful medicine. And Arrett went down to Maidstone in Kent to visit a project where doctors are beginning to prescribe gardening as part of the road to health.
For a long time, I've truly believed that being out in green space is really good for us. It's something that we need as a natural therapy on a regular basis. But what is it about a garden or that outside space that is so healing? The theory of spending time in green spaces and prescribing gardening instead of pills is gaining momentum. I've come to the Blackthorn Trust Garden in Kent. It's been set up to help those suffering from mental health issues and to help people manage chronic pain. Patients can be referred by a doctor when traditional approaches aren't working. Susanna Odlin is a therapy coordinator here. So you would come in, referred, and then what happens?
Most people are very depressed or have lost their confidence. Most people are in a very dark place when they arrive. So together we find out what they hope to gain from being here.
Alongside counselling and therapy, patients are encouraged to spend vital time in the garden with others.
We often socialise people first, and because we all need this sense of belonging, that's also part of a well-being. The garden can be a very safe and gentle place to start. Some of the people would say, I feel completely dead inside. So working in the garden enlivens the senses again. And the senses are really our gateway to the world.
It's really lovely, isn't it, thinking that that living material can quite literally bring somebody back to life again, really.
Absolutely.
They base their principles on the teachings of the respected scientist and philosopher, Dr. Rudolf Steiner, who believed in a holistic approach to gardening, where plants and people benefit each other in a symbiotic way, much like that seen in nature. Lisa has been coming here for nearly 2 years after a car accident left her with chronic back pain.
I was never really interested in flowers, plants or anything before my accident and before finding Blackthorn. Yeah. Now they're just wonderful, the beauty of them and the peace that it brings to me. I get lost in it.
What do you think you'd be doing if you wasn't at Blackthorn?
I'd probably be at home, laid flat with lots of medication and not really doing anything but coming to Blackthorn. Each part and each stage of the programme brought me back to life.
Vivian was prescribed the garden to address the effects of social isolation, while Mark's just been coming here for a few months. So Mark, what brought you to Blackthorn?
Well, I came here because I was disabled a couple of years ago and I've been in constant pain and found that daily living was just about managing my pain and managing the anxieties and problems that come with it. And I came to Blackthorn and it's given me a bit of space for me so that I've got something I can look forward to. There's something about being sort of close to the plants. It really makes you feel sort of grounded. And connected, and that's what this place does. It makes you feel connected.
And we take an interest in each other, you know, and their other people's problems, and it just sort of alleviates yours.
Do you think you'd get the same benefit if we were just sat down at a cafe having a chat?
No.
No.
Why is that?
I spend a lot of time in my head, in pain. Being here, there's just something about it.
Gardening. There's only one way to say it, it's good for you.
It certainly is. Paul used to come here to treat his depression and social anxiety.
So, do you think you know what it was specifically about the gardening that was helping your particular condition?
Well, one thing I noticed over the time of being here is that I had a growing sense of the interconnected nature of things.
Okay.
That was really important for me. On a personal level, I was quite broken.
Right.
And I needed to come back together, so it felt like gardening facilitated that.
Yeah.
Having that awareness that everything changes, everything's transient, definitely gave me a sense of hope for the future. I'm now a self-employed gardener.
Oh, really?
That's keeping me very busy.
That's brilliant. The fact that now a therapy has now become your work.
Yes.
It just goes to show, doesn't it? You know, how things can just turn around with a bit of time and patience like our lovely plants need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's clear that prescription gardening is working for the people here, and it's looking hopeful that green medicine could be offered to more people in the future. It's predicted that in the next 5 years, social prescribers working with the NHS will give out 900,000 appointments a year, which will include gardening.
All of these stories are a compelling argument for how gardening can be a medicine. It can relax, it can rejuvenate, and it can help with social interaction. And all of those benefits are not only good for the body, but for the mind and spirit too.
I do think that it's really good that the medical profession is seeing gardening as something that they can prescribe and use as part of their armoury to heal people. And given that the stats show that 1 in 4 people at some time in their lives do seek help for mental health problems, there is clearly a real need for everything possible. And I know for myself that when things are really bad, if I can get myself out into the garden and start to garden, I invariably feel better. That however you come at it, whoever prescribes it or gets you to do it, gardening heals. Now, I don't know if I've healed this tree, but I think it looks better. It's been topped, it's been cut back, it's been tied up, it's had another trim, and now I've just got another 7 to do. Now that is going to be quite a long job, but by way of a little bit of light relief, I'm just going to plant a couple of hydrangeas. I've got very keen on hydrangeas recently. They used to be desperately unfashionable. I'm delighted that more and more people are growing them. Now, the first one that I'm going to put into this gap here is perhaps the most popular current variety of all, which is called Annabelle. This is a hydrangea arborescens, and its distinguishing feature are these great mop heads or white mass flower heads, and likes sort of semi-woodland. So it's good for shade. It's hardy, certainly down to about -25, which will cope for most of us. I often get letters about people saying that they haven't flowered. Almost invariably, it's because they've got too dry. So one thing they hate more than anything else is drying out too much. Okay, that's one hydrangea. The other one is a bit different. Whereas Annabelle is almost muscular in its profusion of flower, the lace caps, like this one, this is Hydrangea villosa, are very different. The foliage is different, and also the flowers are much more floaty. They're elegant. Nevertheless, they grow in much the same way, and light dappled shade is perfect. This will grow to about 5 foot, so a very good plant for a border. because it's not going to block it out or dominate it, yet at the same time it's going to have real presence and substance. Now, it is really important I give these a good soak. Now, I've said that gardens heal, but the truth is that there are some illnesses that neither gardens nor anything else can cure. But what gardens can do is improve the quality of life, however ill you are. And Adam went to South Oxfordshire to visit a community garden set up by those with Parkinson's disease.
Parkinson's is a progressive neurological condition which affects the brain and can cause symptoms which include shaking of the hands or arms, muscle stiffness and slowness of movement. Despite research, there is still no cure for it.
This is incredible if this is just done from seed.
Yeah. You and Stut set up a charity for people with Parkinson's and created this garden a year ago.
Who's involved? How does it work?
It's friends, family, and the message has gone out from there. And that's what we're all about with the Parkinson's element, really, is to kind of create awareness and get people involved, really, and a sense of community.
When were you first diagnosed?
I was diagnosed when I was 41, which is 7 years ago now, because I was working at the time. You know, I've got a young family, and you know, you've been given this diagnosis of this, you know, progressive degenerative condition. What do you do? So actually, from my point of view, it's a case of trying to crack on and do the normal things, but actually the acceptance of the diagnosis is huge.
So what do you feel the garden brings to the community?
It brings a space that people can come and relax. The availability to talk about Parkinson's. They have the mindset of kind of, you know, they're going to be interacting with people with disabilities.
You really seem to have like connected with the natural world.
It's something that I really enjoy. It's, you know, I always kind of enjoyed, you know, walking and getting out and about, but yeah, now to be having the opportunity to create, and I think that's probably what it is actually, is that creativity. And I've been a very creative person throughout my whole life. I mean, I was diagnosed 7 years ago. If you'd have seen me on day 2 of the diagnosis, we wouldn't have been having this conversation.
No, I bet we didn't. No, I bet we wouldn't. No.
I'm really impressed with how much they've achieved. They always seem to have a project on the go. And I'm going to help them with a sensory garden.
So Adam, if we start trying to work out a rough guideline or
Yes.
a framework?
Yeah, so if we get them laid out, mate, so it's sometimes quite nice, rather than just putting a block of 3 or, you know, a line, is just to give yourself something to build off. And maybe work that one there, and then we can start to arrange the others around it, you know. So today we're creating a garden which is all about the senses. Is there an importance of that connection with Parkinson's itself?
There is in many ways. A lot of Parkinson's sufferers actually lose the sense of smell. But if you can't use your smell, you've still got the sense of touch.
So how often do you come down here?
I get down as often as I can. You get the chance to actually do things that you forgot you could do again. A lot of people with Parkinson's have problems with balance. And surprisingly, when you come here, you suddenly find out that you think you've got a problem, but next minute you're on your knees putting plants in. And you think, well, how did I get here?
So when were you first diagnosed?
About 9 years ago.
Yeah.
The way I describe it is that my world fell apart. I was given the diagnosis, that was the end of life, I thought,
Yeah.
at the time. I'm a very positive person, and Parkinson's can actually affect you in that way. Emotionally, you can become quite negative. So to have something like this that pushes you on, moves you forward, because the actual involvement of working in a garden, I can forget that I've got Parkinson's, and that is really great.
You're actually doing something, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah,
You
you're
know,
achieving.
Yeah.
You're achieving, and Parkinson's doesn't want you to achieve. Parkinson's wants you to close down physically, emotionally, mentally. And something like this just triggers all those responses and keeps us human.
Keeps us moving big.
I like that, mate. Keeps us moving big. Do you know, one thing that strikes me straight away about Parkinson's is it could be incredibly isolating. And this garden, even as a social space, really breaks those barriers down. And then on top of that, it's educating a community.
Paul Mayhew Archer is a stand-up comedian and co-writer of Vicar of Dibley. He has Parkinson's and is a regular visitor to the garden.
What I really love about coming here is that mostly I'm in a community where people are moving very quickly, and I'm moving very slowly. But plants grow very slowly.
They grow at totally
even more slowly than me. So I feel sort of at what
you're at speed.
Yes, I'm up to speed, if not in excess of speed of the plant.
I think what's blown me away today is how you've all found your way. You know, Ewan's found the garden, shared the garden. You've got your humour.
Yeah.
You know, but bringing those together.
Yes, and I think it's very important that we do share these different things with communities.
Sharing the space has been one of Ewan's biggest aims. He's invited students from the local primary school to help create a bug hotel and plant up a wildlife area with the volunteers.
What he's done is he's got children to come in, do some gardening, which is fun, and then along the side of it, they discover about Parkinson's and discover that people with Parkinson's are not strange beings, they're just normal beings who just happen to have an illness.
What sort of insects do you think we're going to find in there?
Spiders.
Yeah, lots of spiders, I bet.
How big do you think that one's going to grow?
Yeah.
I think it's quite tall, isn't it?
Quite tall, yeah.
The great thing about having Parkinson's is that if ever there's anything difficult to do, you know, like heavy lifting or heavy digging or anything, I can just say, I just can't manage that all the time. So I can get out of doing anything at all labour intensive.
You've got it probably worked out.
And I can say at any point, I just need a bit of a lie down now, thank you very much indeed.
For me, what stood out today is Ewan and how he's driven this forward. It's like the stone that's been dropped in the pond and it's just rippling out into the community.
What I really like about that is the way that it enables people to transcend their illness. It must be so easy, especially when you're first diagnosed, to be defined by such a serious disease as that. And yet, a simple garden shared with other people means that you can go beyond that and find yourself doing things you thought you couldn't do anymore, and investing in a future that is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but full of the joy and the richness of life. That is very powerful medicine. This is Radicchio Palmarosa, and it's been a good year for it. But by this time, what you can get are the outer leaves closing over the inner ones, and rather like bald roses, forming a carapace, which then rots, and the whole thing looks rather nasty. But you can just take them away, and don't worry if they're a bit slimy, because underneath they will be fine. And the other thing about all chicory is that you cut it off and it regrows. So we may well get 2 or even 3 harvests from this. Now, still to come, we meet a woman who has discovered the healing power of gardening through her love of roses.
I had these desperately dark days and had no idea really what was happening. I just believed that it was how everybody felt.
But first we join Joe at a garden that he designed for Stoke Mandeville Hospital in Buckinghamshire.
Garden design is always a challenge.
It's brain stretching, and working with the elements can be testing.
But sometimes the brief is really, really big.
Just over 2 years ago, the windows of the National Spinal Injuries Centre at Stoke Mandeville Hospital looked out over shrubs and grass. But with uneven paths and a slope, it was out of reach for many patients. The nature of spinal injuries often involves long spells in hospital and many challenges, including the potential loss of privacy. But a charity called Horatio's Garden is on a mission to build an accessible garden for every NHS spinal centre in the UK. Jackie Martin-Loff is the head gardener here.
The brief for the garden was to create a very beautiful garden, 365 days a year, that was patient-friendly for a patient in a chair or in a bed, so no right angles, smooth curves, but also for them to be able to reach some of the flowers and tend to some of the flowers, or to come along and pick the sweet peas. That was also an important part of the brief.
But the list of requirements went on.
Patients in wheelchairs and beds are extremely vulnerable, so the paths had to be wide and the surface pancake flat, because even the tiniest bump can be extremely painful. So the first thing to do was bring in the diggers.
In all, around 2,500 tonnes of earth were removed. Beds were built, the surface smoothed.
And we came up with this.
Almost half an acre of flat landscape garden to give patients access to nature and more independence. It's also got an accessible greenhouse big enough for 2 beds and an outdoor garden room, where they can make a couple with their families and sit indoors or out.
There's a series of seating pods, all created with these sinuous curved lines, and they vary in sizes. So some are larger for larger gatherings and some much smaller, intimate spaces. And the planting for privacy at the moment are things like the grasses and the verbena, but over time these yews that have been planted, and they're going to create these organic blobs and add a little bit more height. And if you're in a wheelchair or a bed, it won't take long before it creates that separation between the areas. Now, movement is a key element in any garden, but here it felt particularly important because of the clinical environment within the hospital. So the way to get movement in is through moving water, which also adds a lovely sound too. And then we've got this curved wall behind it, which bounces the sound around the garden and into the wards when the doors are open.
The site is also a bit of a wind tunnel, so we played with that too. Grasses of all heights waft in the wind, and as they grow, the trees are joining in.
Fundamentally, I wanted to celebrate nature in all its glory and bring it right into the hospital grounds, in fact, right up to the hospital windows and doors. Now, I knew it would work from a design point of view, but I didn't realise the impact it was going to have.
Hannah Mosin is 18. She's had multiple operations for a spinal cord injury. And so far, she and her mother, Anissa, have lived in this hospital for over 7 months.
At the beginning, I didn't want to leave my room. I kind of felt like my room was a safety blanket. You have days where you don't want to talk to anyone or you don't want to do anything, and it's not a good trap to kind of fall into because it can cause so many different... It can like lead to depression and things. So it's really nice to come out here and just sit here and look at all the plants or talk to people. But now I love getting up and coming out here. I look forward to that during the day.
When Hannah was being hoisted and was in the bed and able to move, it was quite nice. We were on this ward and they would bring her bed out, the whole bed, Even if she said no, they say, no, you need to get out and get some fresh air. And so we just come out with a bed and you have multiple beds in here. And the families, you know, like sitting with their loved ones and just enjoying the plants and the air, and it's really lovely. A few hours later, you could just see her changing and just bubbly, and you can see her, like I can see my daughter back, you know, like not the depressed one. I can just see her being happy and jolly.
Sarah Wilson came to this spinal unit 9 months ago as a result of a horse riding accident. Her youngest daughter is 3 years old.
Having children visit you in hospital, children by nature are quite noisy at times. So being able to come out here and they can play and just have some space where you feel that that's okay, rather than you're waking someone up or, you're in the way in a ward environment, it's made a big difference to them. Previous hospital I was on a top floor ward with no windows, very hot, very stuffy, very uninviting environment for children. But here they love coming here, love visiting me, which is amazing.
As well as the patients tending plants in the greenhouse, there are activities and workshops here, including a recent one about propagation that's open to everyone.
They were able to wheel my bed out and I was able to join in on the propagation workshop, which was really good fun.
How was it
really,
propagating
really nice.
From your bed or in your bed? Propagating in your bed or on your bed?
Both, in and on. They just sat me up slightly and I was just able to put the pots on my lap, and it was everybody just helps us and gets involved, and it was a really lovely afternoon, and being stuck inside for so long, it meant a lot to be back outside and enjoying the time with other patients.
This garden at Stoke Mandeville has been open for just a year, so there's masses of growing and filling out that's still to come. But already it's had a positive impact.
I think it surprises us all, really, the power that a garden can have over our mood each time we step out into it. There is one patient in particular who comes out in his electric chair, and because the garden has been designed on these beautiful curves, he follows the curves of the garden and just works his way around the entirety, looking at the planting and taking the garden in several times. He doesn't just do one lap, completely within his own world. Yeah, it's very special.
This has been a massive project.
I can honestly say this is the most important garden I have ever designed. And it proves to me the power of nature and that gardens really can be life-changing.
It's been such a privilege to be a part of it, and the result has been truly overwhelming.
It's wonderful to see the transformative effect that Joe's garden has. And it looks superb, and I'm sure that it will go on to be a magical and really important place and part of the healing process. And I say this with some experience because a long time ago, over 40 years ago, my twin sister had a bad car crash and broke her neck and spent many months at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. And I used to go up there weekly to visit her. And although the hospital were wonderful and they did everything they could, a garden like that would have transformed it. So I'm really pleased to see it there. This is a job I always really like, which is planting up spring bulbs in pots, and particularly the group that I'm going to be planting now, which are iris. Now, most people think of irises as bearded irises, but the irises that I love at the beginning of the year are much smaller. Iris reticulata, for example. And if you put them into pots, they're these little jewel-like displays, and they can look absolutely fabulous as early as February and flower right through till April, depending which variety you do. But all of them demand a very particular type of compost. In fact, this compost is the bee's knees because I've mixed up a peat-free coir-based compost with quite a lot of our sieved leaf mould, and the leaf mould opens it out. These bulbs like a nice loose root run, but that isn't enough in itself. We need to go another step beyond that and add plenty of grit. So I'm going to mix them up. So if I put in half a bucket of that and then add the same quantity of grit, that much. Mix it all up. The result is truly a very gritty mix. Now, alpine pans like this have very large drainage holes, and that's on purpose. But what it does mean is that you have to cover them up to a certain extent, otherwise all the soil falls out. And this is where crocks come in. So pop that in the bottom, and then we can just put in a layer like that, about half full, and then you plant the bulbs onto it. Now I'm going to start with one of my favourites and a really well-known iris called Harmony. This lovely, clear, bright blue flower. As always, pointy end up, just place them in the pot. Now when you're planting in a container, you can plant much closer than if you're doing in a border of any kind, but they should never be touching. There should always be some clear air around them. Cover them over with another layer of compost. Now what I like to do at this point is then cover that with a layer of clean grit, and this serves two purposes. One, it looks nice, but secondly, it stops any of the compost splashing up when you water it or it's out in the rain and marking the petals. Because remember, these are going to be small. They will only rise a few inches above the pot. It keeps them looking at their very best. What I want to plant into this little pan is one of my favourite irises. It may be my favourite to look at, but I have to say it's one of my least favourite to pronounce, and I'm bound to get this wrong. So if you are Dutch, I apologise in advance. It is called J.S. Dijt. D-I-J-T. It's got beautiful, intense purple and mauve petals. Now, at this stage, the thing to do is give them a good water, let that drain, then put them somewhere that is protected but not from cold. It doesn't matter if they freeze absolutely solid, but what they do need protection from is too much rain. Ideally, underneath glass, so they're getting the sunshine but they're not getting the water, and they will be at their very best round about the end of February, the beginning of March. Now, plants have a powerful effect on all of us. I'm talking about these as treasures in the middle of winter. And there's no doubt about it that one of the reasons I like them is because I don't like winter. I get very depressed in winter, and it lifts that gloom. And some people can develop a close, emotional, even spiritual relationship with certain plants that really help them get through their lives. And we went to visit Michelle Thomas in Saffron Waldron, who has developed a deep and abiding love for her beautiful roses.
I find the best medicine for me is literally just putting my boots on, stepping outside, breathing in the fresh air, getting stuck into my gardening. It really does soothe the soul. My name's Michelle Thomas, and I love roses, I love gardening, and I now have approximately 230 roses in my garden. I adore them for the smell, the colour, the shapes of some of them, especially the single roses, and I love cutting them, bringing them into the house, so then you've got the scent around you in the house.
I love everything about roses, really. I first noticed I was struggling with mental health problems probably when I was round about an 11 and away at school. I knew I got very, very homesick. I knew I didn't like school, but I did think that everybody felt the way I felt, where you had these absolutely immensely dark days. But I carried on. I worked in London, number of different jobs. I got married. I had my daughter Ria. And then when Ria was 2, I went on and had my son Miles. But sadly, when he was just a few weeks old, he died. That obviously knocked me for 6. But I carried on. I ended up having my 3 sons, Tom, Ollie and Barney. But I still had these desperately dark days and had no idea really what was happening. I still just believed that it was how everybody felt. I mean, everybody gets bad days. And it was only through having to see my doctor really quite a lot with not feeling I was coping did we discover that there was actually something wrong with me and I was suffering from a type of bipolar, along with also PTSD. About 27 years ago, my daughter bought me a tiny little rose. But this rose was in a little plastic pot and I kept it in the kitchen. I didn't know back then that you needed to plant roses out in the garden. I kept it inside, its leaves fell off, it looked seriously ill. So then I did eventually bring it outside. I had no borders, nothing, just an expanse of lawn. So I dug a hole and plonked it in. 27 years later, it's still here. We've had our moments when it hasn't looked too great, but I've learnt to prune them, feed them, and it's actually now doing very well. And then the other little ones that I have down here are all from my boys. I added these ones, which I allowed to go much higher, so you kind of get this different shape in the border. But that was the beginning of my garden, and this was it. But I didn't see the connection back then that doing all of this was actually helping me feel better. I don't know the names of anything. It just doesn't bother me what they're called. Just like them to be well, healthy and look beautiful, really. In fact, it's far more interesting when everybody tells me that, oh, I see you've got this, or I see you've got that. And I sort of say, have I? So this rose is actually one that my husband gave me, probably about 8 years ago. However, when he gave it to me, it looked like it was dying. It was sort of just one little branch that looked very, very sad. But luckily, it didn't die, and it kept going and is now doing relatively well. It really does have the look of velvet with its dark centre. And I think it really is suited here against the lightness of the house and next to the lemon roses as well. This is one of my favourite spots in the garden. I absolutely love sitting here, especially in the evenings, and the sun's going down, but it throws this light out on the flowers in front of me, and the smell is absolutely beautiful. It is so peaceful as it starts to turn dark. It really is a lovely spot to sit. I think my roses have probably done so well because I do care for them. I do my very best to look after them, and in a sense, that makes me feel they must care about me too. 2 years ago, when all my children had left home, I decided I really wanted to do something with the garden. And that's when I discovered the NGS, National Garden Scheme. So I now open to the public. And I think through doing that, it makes me have to garden all the time. You know, you want it looking nice. When I'm mentally not feeling good, I still have to go outside to garden. So in a way, it's almost been the cure. I do love the fact that I'm raising money for charities. But this year as well, money's going to Mind, which of course is for the mental health problems. And that really does matter to me. I finally realised after all these years that if I'm gardening, I'm going to be okay. I feel safe, happy, and it works.
Michelle has learnt the one true secret of good gardening, and that is love. If you love your garden, if you love your plants, that love is returned, and what happens is something bigger than you and bigger than the garden, and that is where the magic lies. Now, I love roses too. This one, called the Pilgrim, flowers magnificently in late May through to early July, and then it has a bit of a rest, and then it comes back. And it started out life as a shrub rose, but it wants to climb. So I've put up good, strong support, and I'm training this shrub up as a climber, and it is starting to climb. So as far as I'm concerned, that's fantastic, because not only will I have this lovely flower, but I will have it soaring up towards the sky. Now, all of us who garden, whether we feel completely well or if we're struggling mentally or physically, acknowledge that gardening helps. It makes us feel better. But there's very little research being done on this. The good news is that it is beginning. And more people are looking at this and saying, what is going on? Why is this happening? How does it happen? And how can we make it happen even more? And Arit has been to investigate.
I was brought up in Hertfordshire, surrounded by a green belt of countryside. But when I moved to London about 20 years ago, I'd get these urges to have to be in nature and would head to Richmond Park. Since then, it has got me thinking that there must be more to being in nature than it just being a nice thing to do. That somewhere in our DNA, we are hardwired to respond to it. American journalist Florence Williams travelled worldwide and gathered scientific evidence which is completely changing the way we think about the impact of nature, green spaces and gardens on us. What exactly was it for you that set you off on your journey?
I spent 20 years living in the mountains in the American West, and I had to move to Washington, D.C., into the heart of the city. I felt really anxious being in that urban environment. I felt depressed, I wasn't sleeping well. And I started to really wonder if I was experiencing something people called nature deficit disorder.
Right.
Which is the idea that when we're disconnected from nature, we just don't feel our best.
Yeah.
And it turns out that there's a lot of evidence now from different researchers and different laboratories around the world asking these exact questions. And I wanted to go to the places that were really doing the cutting edge research, showing what these different experiences and environments did to our brains and to our bodies.
Wow. What was it that the scientists were looking for?
They were really looking at this concept of biophilia, which is the notion that as humans, we evolved outside in natural landscapes. And so our nervous systems are really built to understand those landscapes.
Yeah.
So when we're in them, on some level, even subconsciously, we just feel more at home there.
Okay, and so was there anywhere in particular that you could see that in action?
There is. The first place I went was Japan. And people in Japan are very stressed out. They work really long hours.
Yeah.
And so the government is really promoting this idea of forest bathing. What that means is going on these trails, and in Japan they're actually called therapy trails, where people practice engaging all of their senses. They take some time to pay attention to the smells and to the sounds and to the feeling of the breeze on their skin. And what this does is it puts them in the present moment. And it turns out the research really shows that if you're after stress reduction, that opening up of the senses really changes your physiology. It can lower your blood pressure, it calms your respiration rate, it actually can lower your cortisol levels, and that's a stress hormone. And this happens after just 15 minutes of being outside, engaging your senses. Some of the things that researchers are finding out when they measure brain waves in people who are outside in nature compared to people who are outside in cities is that our frontal cortex, which is sort of our thinking brains, really start to deactivate when we're outside in nature as our sensory brains come online.
Right.
And what this does is it actually gives our thinking brains a little bit of a rest, almost like a muscle that gets overused, right, in modern life when we're in our workplaces all day long and on our devices. And so that when we go back to work after a short break outside, we're actually more productive, we're more creative, we can think more clearly.
What's remarkable is that countries like Japan and South Korea are now so taken with the evidence of the impact of forest bathing, they are building it into some of their healthcare programs.
Some doctors are prescribing time outside. There are a number of classes in these countries for women who are pregnant, for cancer patients, for people who have worker burnout. So it's focused sometimes on different groups of people, but anyone can go out and enjoy these healing forests and feel, I think, some of these effects.
There is hard evidence that we need nature.
There is, and you know, we live in an evidence-based culture. So in order to change people's behaviors, in order to change the way schools spend time with their children, in order to change the way doctors might treat patients, they need this evidence. And so it's really exciting that we're getting more of all the time.
Well, I'm sure that people would enjoy a walk more than another tablet. So, yeah.
The scientific evidence for the health benefits of nature is there, but how much time in green spaces and in our gardens do we actually need?
There's a recent study out of England specifically looking at the question of dose. And they came up with a very specific recommendation after surveying thousands of people. And they ended up recommending 2 hours a week of time outside.
Okay, I would have thought it would have been more, actually.
Well, some people think that may sound like a lot, but you know, it can break down to 20 or 30 minutes a day. In fact, there's a very generous way to look at nature, which is sometimes it's just a neighborhood filled with trees. Sometimes it's sitting in a beautiful space or a park, or even a courtyard in your workplace, where you can see some trees, maybe see some clouds, feel some natural daylight. So there are lots of different ways to think about nature. It doesn't have to be something pristine and perfect.
It's great to know that all of this evidence just backs up what we know anyway, and that is to be outside in nature.
No more excuses. Let's go.
The thing that I find really striking about that is how little time you need to be outside to have a beneficial effect. 2 hours a week is hardly more than 15 minutes a day. And as gardeners, we're outside much more than that. And it does show, even if you just go out and do a bit of deadheading, a little bit of tidying up, it is going to do you good. And obviously, if you can do more than that, so much the better. Now, here in the greenhouse, I've got a little bit of a problem, and that's coming from flies and butterflies, would you believe it? Because the grapes have been really good, but they're not quite ripe yet. But the flies and the butterflies have been feasting off them for the last few weeks. And then I realised that I'd taken all my pitcher plants, these Sarracenias, are carnivorous plants, out of the greenhouse where they've been for the last 4 or 5 years and put them outside where they've been very happy. But the flies in here have increased. So the carnivorous plants, I think, were doing a much better job in previous years than I'd given them credit for. So I'm bringing them back. And the thing about Sarracenias, as well as all carnivorous plants, is they are bog plants. They like to be wet all the time, so they need to be standing in a tray of sorts. You just keep that tray topped up, and you must use rainwater. So you just, every day in summer, and then in winter, you just need to do it about once a week. They can dry off a little bit more, but never dry out completely. Now, you don't have to keep these in a greenhouse. They're much hardier than you might think. I've had some outside that are frozen solid, and they've still survived. But if you do keep them in a greenhouse, they do a very good job for you. Now, talking of jobs, here are some jobs for you this weekend. Now is a good time to take rose cuttings. Choose a nice, vigorous growth about the thickness of a pencil. This can be subdivided into lengths about 6 to 9 inches long, but make sure that you mark the bottom of each piece by cutting it at an angle. Remove either all or most of the leaves and then bury the cuttings in a gritty compost so only the top is showing. Put this to one side, it doesn't need any special protection, and leave it over winter, and it will start to show signs of growth next spring. Before you bring any plants into the greenhouse to store over winter, it's a good idea to give it a thorough clean. And by the way, I find white vinegar mixed with water is superb at cleaning glass. This will do two things: improve the light levels, particularly at a time of year when they're low anyway, and also reduce the risk of virus and disease spreading to your stored plants. I love pears, but they do need careful handling because they don't ripen on the tree. Lift each fruit carefully, and if it's ready, it will come away in your hand. Avoid bruising it, and either store it in a cool, dark place, or you can hasten ripening by putting them on a sunny windowsill. Well, that's it for today. And if there's anything that you want to find out more about, whether it be about gardening or about gardening and health, then do go to our website. And what I would say from personal experience, that particularly at this time of year, as the weather is bound to get worse and the days are getting shorter and shorter, is get outside every day. If you possibly can. If you've got a garden, get into your garden and do something. And if you haven't got a garden, go for a walk and you will feel better. Now, I'll be back here at Longmeadow next week, but at the later time of 8:30. But it's going to be worth the wait because we've got a programme filled with beautiful berries. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.